Welcome to The Kingstonian, a podcast that profiles people who are passionate about what they do for a living, what organization they belong to, or the community they are a part of. Here is your host, Dave Cunningham.
Thank you, Steve. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Let's talk about the arts. Spending time in a museum to see paintings and sculptures, going to a theater to watch actors bring a story to life on the stage, or joining friends to listen to live music or enjoy a dance performance. Those are just some of the conventional ways we support the arts. Our guest in this episode is passionate about pulling as many aspects of art together and presenting them in venues you might not expect, while being mindful of the environment around the presentation. She is a writer, former broadcaster, producer, who was part of a group called the Calliope Collective. I found this description of what they see themselves doing, and I think it's a good description. They look to, quote, cultivate a sense of wonder, encouraging the letting go of preconception, end quote. Here is our conversation with Tricia Knowles. Tricia, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'd like to welcome those of you who are listening on the other side of the speaker, and a reminder that we are recording this particular episode in mid-July 2023. So, Tricia, we are here to talk about you, the Calliope Collective, your passion for the arts, and how art is experienced by people like me. So let's start with me. Occasionally, I listen to music, typically live music, typically in bars.
Okay.
From time to time, attend stage plays in theaters, visit historic sites when I may be taking a foreign trip, and I also volunteer at a small local museum. So I am open to expanding my horizons, and I'd like you to give me a general overview of the kinds of things that you're doing right now.
What I'm doing right now is trying to work with fellow artists to curate events and spectacles and sometimes festivals that really encourage sustainable development of arts and culture. So I love that you said you're really into historic sites and museums, because I have this deep passion for creative placemaking and interactive immersive events that really inspire residents to be part of the change they want to see in their community. So what I'm trying to do is really bring multiple artistic disciplines together to produce spectacle that will open people's hearts and minds to that change that they want to see. And often, for the last 6 years with Calliope, I've been creating shows with my collective members that have really inspired that and incorporated live music, have incorporated theater arts, have incorporated circus and flow arts, along with the creative placemaking. Large-scale puppetry has always been at the forefront of what we've been doing with Calliope. I don't think we've ever done a show that hasn't included fire, large-scale puppets, and circus of some sort, which has been really great. So I really thrive on seeing all of these artists come together to collectively create something truly unique that the process decides what that end product is going to end up being.
When someone has a passion for doing something, it usually takes them a little bit to get to where they are at a given point where that passion really starts to show itself. So let's go back and talk about how you got to where you are, previous lives and that sort of thing.
I have lived so many previous lives. It's been an interesting journey. I think I come from a radio and TV background, and so being on air for a really long time, close to 15 years, but also having worked in promotions and music direction and marketing within the radio and television industries allowed me to gain a skill set that really is indicative of wearing all of the hats that you end up wearing when you're in an arts organization, and being able to do a lot of the things that need to be done. From there, I left corporate radio in 2012, and I started a freelance business. And it was really interesting because some people just kind of shook their head at me and, what are you doing? You're leaving this job that's 9 to 3 every day with benefits and paid vacation. And why would you do that? And because it wasn't feeding my spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And there were so many restrictions and limitations, and the formula of what it was at the time was not resonating and aligning with my values and what I wanted to put my energy into supporting. And so I thought I was a new mom, and I thought, well, I'll just take a little bit of time and I'll work part-time and I'll do freelance. And so I started writing. I say I'm a recovering journalist, and doing a lot of entertainment and arts related pieces for magazines and paper. And I went back to school for cultural planning and development through UBC, and then started producing. I had always produced community events. I shouldn't say always, but throughout my 20s and into my 30s, I was producing community events and festivals. And just in my free time, it was something I loved to do. So I found myself at this intersection of helping do some publicity and marketing for artists and arts organizations that couldn't afford a marketing person while I was going through school, and having an opportunity to start producing events and spectacle and festivals, not at a corporate level, but definitely, well, I guess a pseudo corporate level. I'm working with companies that are run by provincial government and producing Pan Am Cultural Festival and some local events throughout Kingston, and realizing that I didn't want to do that anymore. And that was a big shock for me, because I thought, like, I love this. This is what I'm doing in my free time. I'm on air, doing a show for X radio station. And while the music is playing, I'm programming an event for Earth Hour.
Mm-hmm.
I'm doing off-grid, music shows and festivals in Northern Ontario. And just, that's what I was choosing to do my free time. So why wouldn't I want to make a living doing that? And then I started making a living doing that. And I didn't like executing someone else's vision.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to self-produce my own work. And then I got really comfortable with using the word artistic producer, artistic director. And now I feel more comfortable using the term artist, but it took me 20 years to get there. So now I'm in a position where I'm back to the marketing. It feels good. I can help execute other people's visions. I can support these beautiful festivals that exist on those smaller term contract basis, but I can also produce my own art and put that out to the world.
I guess before we go much further, we should apologize to all the journalists who are listening based upon the comment. I know there are good journalists out there and enjoy their job. It's interesting how you described your move from radio into something you really love doing and wanted to give yourself the opportunity to exercise the passion you had for that, as opposed to relying on the benefit plan and the paid vacation and all that a job in radio may have afforded you. In my particular case, it was the opposite, is that I enjoyed doing radio, but I left because I had 3 kids, and radio typically, unless you're in Toronto or the big cities, doesn't pay a lot. So it was the opposite way around. Hence why I do a podcast, to rebuild that passion I had for this kind of thing, doing the radio thing. But anyway,
it's just funny that you say that, because I remember I went to school for radio and television arts in Nova Scotia. And then I was like, I'm going to be a journalist. I'm going to do the TV thing. And I sat behind a microphone and I fell in love. And it turns out I was pretty good at it over the years. And I loved it fiercely. And there was just this shift in the industry where it went from being about a radio station that was supporting community and the people in it, and the arts especially, to being more about what big cities we're dictating should be on the air. And I'd mentioned before being chastised for promoting an arts-based event that I thought would be really engaging for my listeners, but because they couldn't afford advertising, I wasn't supposed to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I'm not going to downplay, because there are some stations, especially in Kingston, who are more community minded,
Mm-hmm.
which is so fantastic. But you see a lot of the smaller town stations, just less and less local content.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and that it just breaks my heart, because it's not what it once was when I fell in love with it.
Oh, yeah. I can agree with that. You mentioned a phrase earlier on, creative placemaking.
Mm.
And I'd like you to expand or describe to those of us who are listening what that means.
So creative placemaking is really, for me, and my interpretation of it, is to help economic development and to promote social change in an area. And it's using the arts and culture to strategically shape the character of a place. So we have in Kingston this amazing park that lies at the intersection of a few different areas leading into the downtown core, McBurney Park, otherwise known as Skeleton Park. And because there is a big festival there every year, and because there is a big community parade every year, there's a big Easter egg hunt, the parade, sorry, at Halloween every year, and the big Easter egg hunt. And there are these activities that take place where there's live music and there's art being displayed and there's theater elements to it. It's animating this space where people naturally intersect. And so that animates those spaces. So for Calliope Collective, we started producing events and really wanted to animate Douglas Fleur Park, which is the only park that runs along the waterfront in the Inner Harbor area towards the north end of Kingston, where you don't see a lot of arts being presented, especially for free. So it is not too far from Skeleton Park, but it is just a little bit off that beaten path where a lot of people aren't necessarily going to be drawn to that place. But by having this event happening in that area, they're going to be drawn to holy smokes, like I didn't even know this was here. This is amazing. There's turtles sunning themselves on the logs, and I could bring my kayak down here. And it opens up a new understanding of the place and an opportunity to interact with the place itself, but also really seeing how community interacts with each other within that space. So just animating those underutilized spaces. So that's a bit of my relationship with creative placemaking. I mean, it can go above and beyond into municipal strategic planning, and I think Danica Lahi from the city of Kingston is probably the best person to speak to about that. It's a really fascinating approach for really enhancing arts and culture within your community and having a thriving artistic scene where your artists are being compensated for their work.
Mm-hmm. There is another example that's almost at the opposite end of that spectrum that you just described. And it's something that you've been involved with and something that I've actually been to. For those of you who aren't from this area, there is a fort that goes back to the 1800s that is perhaps one of the most visited tourist attractions in Canada, from what I've heard. And it is located right in the city, effectively. And once the summer is over, the pretend Fort Henry guards and the cannons and all that sort of thing stop firing. And so it basically sits there. And a few years ago, someone had the bright idea to take advantage of the fort during the Halloween period. So describe for those who may not have been there what Fort Fright is all about.
Oh my God, I loved that job. What a joy it was to help produce that event. I got to design the haunt for Fort Fright for 2 years and produce one of them. And I mean, it wasn't created by me. I'm not sure who the first person was, but I worked with a beautiful man by the name of Greg Guthrow, and it was Neil Shorthouse who brought me in and to produce a Pan Am Cultural Festival, actually at Fort Henry. So it was a cultural festival around the Pan Am Games, and they had hired me as a freelancer to come in and produce uh, this festival, which was wonderful in itself. And then I was asked to stay on and keep going with Fort Fright, and it really is that animating a site and using a location in a way that it's not necessarily meant to be used. So the transformation, I mean, a lot went into that. I studied the psychology of fear, and all these different types of scare actors that you can have live humans interacting with your audience that's going through. So it's a lot of theatrical set design, it's a lot of working with actors, it's costuming, and then it is that psychology of the scare, and really studying fear, which was so incredible. And I hear it's coming back this year, which I'm so thrilled about. But to see the storyline, we went from the years that I was there, we really took Fort Fright from being, not to downplay what it was, because it was amazing. I always said, I want to work here. I want to, someday I'm going to work for this. And someday I did. So that was really cool. When I was working in radio, we used to do the sleepovers at the fort. And so you'd go during Halloween season and you would rent one of the barracks. And so a bunch of us from the radio station would go in and we would camp out and, experience the hauntedness of Fort Henry. And so during that period, I said, I'm going to work here someday, which was kind of hilarious that actually ended up happening. But it was interesting in the years that I was there, just getting back to what I was saying, that we had taken it from being just your typical like haunted house type thing with a lot of, here's a barrack scene and here's a kitchen scene. And we started creating storylines and really having that dramaturge throughout the entire haunt itself. So that it was an experience right from the very beginning until the end. And then doing a couple little add-on haunts that also involved, not just copywriting, but creative writing and storytelling. And that was an incredibly rewarding experience. I gained so much knowledge producing that event, I should say co-producing that event, in terms of, technical ability and knowledge and how to go into producing a large scale event. I gained a lot of experience when I was there, for sure.
Well, if Fort Fright is coming back, I'll have to let my wife know, because she'll love those rubber snakes coming back for a return visit.
We created one of the add-ons was called Hooded one year. And so you came in and it was based on this story of a soldier who got trapped in the underground tunnels. And so when you went through, you went in and you watched a video about this story that Josh Lyon did, who hilariously ended up as my creative partner in Calliope. But we would hood them, and then you would walk through the experience holding on to a rope. And so there would be, the smell of dirt hitting your nostrils, and there would be slidey floors. And there was one thing, just because you said the snakes, if I don't know if your wife has a snake fear, if it's just like bugs and creepy crawlies, but it was called the maggot sifter. And so it had rice that would come out and just pour all over you. It was disgusting, but also brilliant. It was a hell of a thing to clean up every night, but it scared the bejesus out of people. So that was a really fun time. It was a good time, but it was still a little corporate. It was one of those things that I was doing that was incredibly rewarding, but also still didn't feel quite aligned with where I want it to be, putting my energy.
Now, I read somewhere that the environment is a passion of yours. And where does that fit into what you're doing?
I think I grew up always having a really strong connection to the elements, and proud pagan, pre-colonial spiritual practices, that really revolve around connecting with the seasons, the cycles of the earth, and aligning ourselves and how we can move ourselves and show up in the world by being aligned to those cycles and those seasons. And so having opportunity with the World Wildlife Federation and the Earth Hour event, I heard about this event happening. I had herniated a disc in my back and I was out. I lost the ability to walk, and I was literally on my back for 3 months. And I heard about Earth Hour happening in Australia. I think this was 2008. And I thought, oh my God, we need to do that here. And so I did it here. And that felt so amazing to just have an idea and somehow serendipitously so connect with the right people in Kingston to make that happen. And we formed a committee and we did it. But the first year it was like 20 of us, maybe 50, standing around the water fountain in Springer Market Square and with drums and candles, $20 out of my own pocket. And then I just started growing it and growing it. And then, I did this event for 7 years. And so the whole theory, for those who don't know about Earth Hours, that we're encouraged around the globe to turn off our lights for 1 hour. Mm-hmm. And it was used a lot to really drive policy towards government to get attention. And we did a fully amplified but off-grid concert in Springer Market Square. So we just started developing that. And there were, a couple thousand people who would come down and stand, with their candles. And we would have performers right up until lights went out at 8:30. And then for an hour, people would perform. And we had some incredible bands and artists who came to play for us through that. And it's like that connection of doing an event that had live music, that had environmental partners, that had circus performers. I swear everything I do has a fire circus performer in it. It felt aligned, whereas the other things weren't necessarily feeding my spirit in that way. And it was at one point just basically running itself. So after about 7 years, I started to step back, and then I think they kept it going for a couple more years after that. And I wanted to set my sights a little more artistic driven and kind of putting some of my own work forward. But I think that was what started the events, as they were connected to environmentalism. And then with Calliope Collective, when we formed in late 2016, I say with a question mark, it was more about how can we encourage people to examine their relationship with the land? How can we get people to start considering the environment in a different way instead of just preaching, and I think that the activism and pushing those policies forward and the work that we did with Earth Hour was really great, but really trying to get into people's hearts, not just their minds.
You mentioned before circus performers end up showing up quite frequently.
They do.
Now we know what your secret dream was when you were a kid, is that you wanted to run away with the circus.
I absolutely did. And now I've created the circus that I will run away with. I love our little circus. It's amazing, but it's not actually like, we're not a circus company. We're very much an arts collective that presents a lot of incredibly talented circus artists. But I remember, I'm not upset that the circus doesn't exist in the way that it did because of the cruelty towards animals and humans that was involved with that situation. But I do remember sitting on an elephant when I was really little and being in a big top and watching a trapeze artist fly with the slimmest of nets protecting them. It was a joy every year. I had a deep love, and I don't know. I guess I always kind of wanted to be a circus performer and never was. I did learn how to stilt walk, and I did that for a few years, which was really fun. I mean, I could still do it occasionally, but we Kingston has a stilting troupe. So that was really fun to learn how to do that, and stilt walking justified my love for costuming. But in having Calliope and creating this, little circusy bits of sort also allows me to create these grandiose wearable art pieces that other people get to perform in. And I love being behind the scenes. Yeah, I like being the ringmaster. More so, I think.
My guess is that this is a much different approach from the way art has been conventionally presented to people. And I'm wondering what kind of reaction you may have received from the so-called conventional groups who do art, if any.
I think when Calliope first started, people saw us very much as the small town grassroots folk art kind of puppet show in the park type performance, which it was to an extent, but it also had this element of spectacle that kind of set it apart. And I think that there is at times, and can be at times, a pretentiousness with fine arts communities and more highbrow kind of events. But I don't know that we've ever experienced anything particularly negative. It's been primarily positive response to what we're doing, because I think that the community and our society at large really is craving a certain level of connection. And not to say that you don't get that with fine arts and the big scale shows. And like, I was just at Cirque du Soleil and blew my mind, and I grinned and glowed like I was a child on that elephant again. But it is a very a much more intimate experience with what you experience with a Calliope show. It's interactive at times before the main show happens. Sometimes there are elements during the show that you get to be a part of. We were so incredibly fortunate. Our last production, we had Grandmother Eartha come with a few musicians who opened the space with a traditional Algonquin water song and really set the stage. And so like the entire audience, I mean, it was 1,200 people over a couple of nights singing to the waters. There's that connection that's made before experiencing a show. So it's a little less than like walk in, grab your seat, sit down and watch. It's really getting engaged and having that heart connection with the storyline. And so I think in terms of the other arts organizations and maybe, that fine arts kind of community, I think that there's a great appreciation for what we do and admiration and respect just as much as we have for what they do, because it's not comparable. It's something completely different. And I think that there's room for both. I think that there's a need for both.
Right. As you and I are sitting here recording this particular episode, and people who are listening to it don't have the benefit of video, but I'm looking at you sitting in your little room, and right over your shoulder as a poster for that latest production, which happened in June of 2023. It's called Hydra. And I was looking at the website description of Hydra, and I couldn't get over how many people were involved, like the artists who were part of that. And it just went on and on and on. And there were all kinds of different people, although the labeling just gave their names or their group name. It didn't really say what they were doing in this. But describe Hydra for the folks who are listening as to what kind of production and where it took place.
So Hydra, the Spirit of Water, is a project that took about 3 years for Calliope to create. And it really encouraged that melding of disciplines that I had talked about, bringing together visual art, performance art, community art, and really that reinforces one another, but also brought together about a dozen key artists, plus all of their crew, to create individual pieces of art that would be displayed on water. And so it was a flotilla of sorts. It was a parade. And so this event, oh my God, what a dream to be able to have done this. This is the event that encouraged Josh Lennon and I to form Calliope. And we did all of the shows up until this point. So, I mean, because we were called to do them, but also building this portfolio so that we could get funding to do this project. And so heavily inspired by the Bosch Parade in the Netherlands and watching this floating water parade from the Netherlands and thinking we have to do that here. So we did that here, which has been really great. So over the course of 3 years, we worked with so many different artists, creating not just the storyline, but these individual pieces of art. So Hydra, the story on water, was done during the pandemic. And it was a pilot run where we explored the history of the waterways in Kingston. We explored pollution, ecology. We had different themes. And we had a lot of Zoom brainstorming meetings with community and really tried to hone in on what people's connection to water was. And then we did all the fund development, and then we put a call out to artists, and some of the pieces were commissioned and some were found from that call to artists. And we asked simply, what is your relationship to water? And how would you demonstrate? How would you exemplify that within a show if we were going to do a story on water? And so this whole storyline developed around the spirit of water based on the pieces that were coming towards us. And so we put together, there were 9 installations in the end. Some of them had different performers overlapping each other. So we had a fire flow circus performance on land at the same time as some giant taiko drums came out on one of the floating installations. And so 9 of them in total, and throughout the course of those individual pieces being presented, an entire story was told. And there is a program on the website where you can read a little bit more. There's a page about the artist, but then there's also a page in the program about the individual works.
Question. I can understand the significance of having people there to participate, to be a part of the event as it takes place. What is the role of taking something like this and videotaping it and then replaying it in another media? I mean, if only for the sake of promoting the event, the artists, and the message. Or is that something you've done?
Well, I think the first year that we did Hydra, we did film it. So that was really a test run. It was during our research and development year. And that was the year we were exploring through themes and trying to work out what the story was that we wanted to tell. And all of our funders allowed us to film the test run and just present it as a video online because of the pandemic, because we weren't allowed to present anything to the public. And so that's why we did it on video. My choice is to have a live shared experience in a place and space together. Okay. I don't know if that answered your question.
I think so.
Okay.
Let's look down the road. My guess is that some of the stuff that you have put together requires a lot of thinking ahead of time, a lot of planning, a lot of working with other folks and other groups to make sure that it comes off the way you want it to come off. As we look down the road, what sorts of things are in the collective mind of the collective?
I'm not going to do anything.
You're not?
I'm not going to do anything. No, I'm going to take a break. Okay. Next year, I'm not going to do a show. A lot of people are really upset about that. But it does. I wear about 7 hats to do a show, from marketing to fundraising to production to dramaturge to, and to bookkeeping. I mean, it's a lot to do a show to the scale that Hydra was. So it's really a show that I think we have that has potential to grow and to shift and to be presented again, perhaps in Kingston, perhaps in another community that has a really great waterway that allows for it. Hydra in Kingston was presented at the Kingston Mills Lock Station. And so it was at the very end of the Rideau Canal, right before the Colonel By in Kingston. And so we used the lock doors basically as our curtain. And the Colonel By was our backstage area. And this holding lock, this overflow lock that's at the Kingston Mills, served as our stage. That was the stage in which all the floating pieces came on, and then our finale was a circus performance on a barge that was in that space of water. And it's a natural amphitheater. It's such a beautiful area to have been able to present a show. So if we can find other locations like that and other partners who can perhaps help with some of the other hats that I wear. So I don't need to wear 7 of them, but perhaps maybe I can break it down to about 3. I'm really excited at the feedback that we've been getting and the attention that the show has gotten. I won't mention names or places or festivals, but it has received some attention and the desire for it to happen again. So it really depends on funding and capacity of the artists that are involved also, and wanting to have an opportunity to have these anchor pieces throughout the story. We have Clelia Scala is an amazing puppet maker who's been with us from the very beginning. She helped us make our first puppets for our first event 6.5 years ago. And it's her heron puppet kind of is the lead of Hydra. And so I've told her, please don't ruin the puppet. Keep the puppet. And so, and throughout, I think there were, again, like a dozen different artists and then like 9 different installation pieces throughout that particular dramaturge that was told in June that can shift. So telling the story and developing it, being guided by how an artist's sculpture was going to changed the storyline. And at one point we had almost like an octopus kind of sea creature by Kyla Todd. And then through her process and connecting, she ended up creating a hydra, like a 3-headed dragon creature, which was so far from what she had initially pitched, and it worked perfectly. So really falling into that process and making sure that there is space when we do it again to have some of these key puppets and performers that were in the show, but also creating space for emerging artists and artists who are local to the area that we're going to present the show in to be able to come together and collectively create something based on their own personal relationship with water and how that could possibly fit into a new storyline. So that's really exciting.
You've mentioned several times the number of hats that you wear when you put these things together. My question is, have you ever thought about going onto the other side of the camera, as it were, and performing yourself? Or is that something you've done?
It is something I have done, and it is not something I care to do again. I really thoroughly enjoy being behind the scenes. I also realize that even just calling a show is a lot of stress on top of ensuring not just that the production unfolds, but the event is taken care of as well. And we had an incredible production team for Hydro, which I'm forever tremendously grateful for. So I didn't have to worry about traffic and, audience and all of parking and any of that kind of stuff. And then Josh taking care of all the making sure things float and don't sink and come out on time. And we had such an incredibly talented team of people to allow for that. But to be in the show, I think it takes away from the perspective and the view and I guess the call to tell a very specific story. That being said, my daughter was in the show. So she was, we had the spirit of water quite literally trapped by plastic. And so our final circus performer and the big finale, Jane Kirby, and my daughter, Penelope, were identical. They were dressed identically. So that way my daughter performed a bit of acro. She's in circus also, and did some performance within this giant plastic bubble. And then the circus performer, Jane, the aerialist, emerged as being freed from this plastic kind of cell that she was in to really reclaim her power.
Mm-hmm.
And that was really satisfying to watch, my family performing in the show. And, my fellow stilt walkers were in the show. And so it's really a community effort that brings, I guess, brings the ability for the message of the story to land in the hearts of the people who are there witnessing it, but also who are in the show.
Yeah.
And having, again, that joined, heart-centered connection with each other, with the space, with the message, with the land, the water.
Well, listen, after you've taken your break and enjoyed that,
just a year or two,
we all look forward to whatever comes out of the collective, and I'm sure it'll be awesome. And I want to thank you for your time today, and I've enjoyed our chat, and all the best going forward.
Oh, you're lovely. Thank you so much.
Our guest in this episode was Tricia Knowles, the artistic director and event producer of the Calliope Collective. And for more information on the group, check out the webpage address in our liner notes. To those of you who have taken the time to listen, thank you, and I'll be back soon.
The theme music for the podcast is Stasis Oasis, written and performed by Kingston musician Tim Aylesworth. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions about any of the episodes, please send a note to the kingstonianpodcast@gmail.com. For details on upcoming guests, follow us on Facebook. The Kingstonian Podcast is hosted by Dave Cunningham and produced in Kingston, Ontario, Canada.